Have you ever wondered what you would do if you discovered that someone was not who you thought they were? What happens when your assumptions about a person completely collapse before your eyes? Imagine sitting in a park, spotting a homeless man, someone unremarkable at first glance, until a patrol car arrives and the truth about him leaves you unable to believe your own eyes. Put yourself in his shoes. Would you be able to treat others fairly without judging them by appearances? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe to uncover more surprising stories like this one. John Thomas sat inside his Rolls-Royce, his sharp eyes locked onto his watch, counting every passing second. He was never in a rush. But today was different. Every move he had made in life had been calculated, every decision meticulously thought through. But today, he would do something different. He wouldn't step out in an expensive suit or polished leather shoes. Today, he would become someone else, a man forgotten by society, a homeless man. He would test how people treated him when wealth and power no longer shielded him. Would the respect he received every day disappear just because his appearance had changed? He recalled the times he had seen homeless individuals on the streets, ignored, passed by without a second glance. Would people see the real him, or would they only see the clothes and the car he owned? A tension settled inside him as he stepped out of the luxury vehicle, his face hidden beneath a worn-out hoodie. No one recognized him. Every step he took was an experiment, an unspoken test, where the only responses came in silence. He sat down on a park bench, phone in hand, waiting, but no one approached. No one even looked. No greetings, no kindness, just indifference. The painful kind. Second by second, John felt the difference. He had always been noticed, respected, acknowledged. But now, dressed in faded clothes, under the cold, dismissive eyes of strangers, he experienced a reality he had never known. But could he endure this experiment long enough to witness the truth, the harsh reality he had never wanted to believe? The answers were coming, and they would change everything. John Thomas felt an unfamiliar weight settle over him as he shed his billionaire persona, trading it for a tattered hoodie and scuffed shoes. The jacket felt loose, its fabric worn and faded, the stains on the cloth, the unfamiliar roughness against his skin, reminders of the role he was about to step into. For the first time in his life, his clothing brought him no pride. Instead, they carried the weight of invisibility. Stepping out of the Rolls-Royce, he was no longer a man of power and influence. He was a nobody, nameless, overlooked. With every step into the park, a nervous energy crept through him. What would people think? Would they even notice the difference between the man sitting there now and the billionaire who once signed million-dollar deals in boardrooms? Could he withstand their silent judgment? Every movement, every passing glance, each one could be a test, a measure of how the world truly saw him. He sat on a worn-down bench, one that had no warmth, no welcome, and waited. A wave of unease washed over him. He had walked into grand ballrooms, places where people flocked to greet him. But here, as he sat still, the divide became painfully clear. Joggers ran past without a glance. A businessman in a tailored suit frowned at the sight of him, before quickly turning away. In their eyes, he wasn't someone. He was no one. John didn't feel anger, only regret. Regret, confusion, and a quiet sadness creeping into his chest. He had everything, but did any of it matter if there was no real connection? He looked around. Only he knew his worth. But would anyone see it? Would this experiment reveal a truth he wasn't ready to face? How long could he keep this up? Leo, John Thomas's loyal driver, felt an unsettling weight in his chest as he glanced at the rearview mirror. There, beyond the polished glass of the Rolls-Royce, John stood cloaked in a faded hoodie, a world away from the life he had always known. For years, Leo had witnessed the admiration and respect people showed John, the man who walked through elite galas in custom-tailored suits, the billionaire who commanded boardrooms with effortless authority. But today, something was different. John was no longer the man Leo recognized, and that realization tightened the anxiety in his gut. His fingers hovered over his phone, the urge to call John growing stronger. If he needs help, I can't just do nothing, Leo thought, wiping the sweat from his palms. He hesitated, his finger hovering over the dial button. He had always been fiercely loyal to his job, to his duty, to John. But what if stepping in now was not what John wanted? John, sitting on a weathered park bench, felt no anxiety. For the first time in years, he experienced pure freedom, not as a billionaire, not as a powerful deal maker, just a man sitting alone, dressed in ragged clothes, experiencing the world from a different perspective. But this feeling, it was strange, uncomfortable, eye-opening. He wanted to see how people would treat him when the layers of wealth and power were stripped away. Would they still see him as a person? Or just another face in the crowd, one not worth noticing? Leo's hesitation continued, but John had already made his decision. "Let me do this." John's voice was calm yet resolute over the phone. "I don't need help. This is my experiment." And so, the story continued. Would John uncover truths he had never dared to face? Would people truly see him, or only the absence of the wealth that once defined him? A mixture of apprehension and expectation swirled in his chest. But deep down, he knew this moment mattered. Sitting motionless on the worn park bench, John watched the world move around him. No one really saw him. They only saw a man in tattered clothes, with worn-out shoes and a faded hoodie. To them, he was invisible. A businessman in a crisp suit glanced at him briefly, then pulled out his phone, avoiding eye contact. A mother, pushing a stroller, hurried her steps so her child wouldn't even look in his direction. Joggers ran past him as if he wasn't even there. John felt an unfamiliar weight settle in his chest. He had expected indifference, but feeling it was different. For the first time, he understood the stark divide between the world he once ruled and the world he now sat in. He wasn't someone important. He wasn't worthy of attention. He was just there, a presence to be ignored. Even the children playing nearby threw him a glance before turning away, as if his existence wasn't worth acknowledging. A quiet sense of disconnection crept over him. John didn't react outwardly, but inside he was disappointed. The truth was painful. He had everything. But did any of it truly matter if, without it, he was seen as nothing? A small flicker of hope surfaced in his mind. He wasn't actually homeless. This was just an experiment. He could leave at any moment, return to his life of luxury. But the others? The ones who lived like this every day? There was no exit for them. Each sidelong glance, each hurried step, each quiet rejection. Every single one of them was a blade cutting deeper. And then the question rose in his mind. If I don't wear the suit, if I don't own the things that society values, am I still a person? Do I still deserve respect? There was no answer, only silence, the kind that felt far louder than any words ever could. Michael Clark, a seasoned police officer, approached with a firm, commanding presence. His sharp gaze swept over John, who remained seated on the worn park bench. John's posture was relaxed, his expression unreadable, yet deep inside, a strange feeling stirred. Every step Michael took echoed like a rhythmic drumbeat in the otherwise quiet park, each footfall thickening the air with tension. It wasn't just the officer's cold, assessing stare. It was the unexpected shift John was about to experience. "Do you have a reason for being here?" Michael's voice was direct, his tone devoid of curiosity, only control. The question hung between them. A test. An evaluation John had never imagined he would face. There was a chill in Michael's words, one that made John feel less like a man sitting in a park and more like a suspect under scrutiny. John met the officer's gaze but didn't answer immediately. Instead, he exhaled slowly, then smiled, not out of defiance, but out of understanding. Michael had no idea who he was speaking to. He didn't know that John Thomas was a billionaire tech mogul, a man whose single decision could shift an entire industry. Michael saw only what society saw: a man in ragged clothes, a nobody. The officer halted a few steps away, hesitation flickering in his eyes for the briefest moment before he steadied himself. He continued forward, unaware that this wasn't just an interaction. He was unknowingly stepping into a situation far beyond his understanding. At that moment, John decided he wouldn't stay silent. He rose to his feet, his piercing gaze unwavering. "Actually," he said evenly, "I'm not who you think I am." Michael Clark squared his shoulders, his hands resting at his belt, his dark eyes clouded like an impending storm. John sat motionless on the park bench, unaffected by the officer's looming presence. He could feel every calculated movement Michael made, slow, deliberate, as if bracing for a confrontation he couldn't yet define. "Do you have a reason for being here?" Michael's voice was firm, lips pressed into a tight line. John lifted his head, his gaze unwavering. He recognized the look in Michael's eyes. It was the same look so many people had given him today, the same assumption, the same pre-made judgment. John had lived long enough to know that once people saw you a certain way, they had already drawn their conclusions. Michael wasn't interested in hearing his story. To him, John was no one, just another nameless, faceless figure in the city's background. His appearance had already dictated the outcome. "Can you move along?" Michael asked again, his voice unchanged. It wasn't a request, it was an order, a meaningless demand, but one that held weight simply because it came from him. John's eyes flickered for a brief second, a quiet storm brewing beneath his calm expression. He wasn't the type to seek conflict, but this time was different. "And if I don't?" John asked, his voice cool but edged with steel. He saw the slight shift in Michael's stance, the way his body tensed at the response he hadn't expected. A silence settled between them, a silence so thick it felt as though the entire park had stilled. John could feel it now. The weight of prejudice, the judgment he had spent his life shielded from, until now. Michael Clark, standing firm in his authority, had no idea that this wasn't just a conversation with a homeless man. This was a clash of perception, power, and reality itself. John Thomas locked eyes with Michael Clark, his gaze unwavering. The tension in the air tightened like a string pulled taut, ready to snap. Everything around them seemed frozen, fallen leaves in the park suspended midair, the world holding its breath. "So why am I being treated this way?" John asked, his voice calm but resolute. He wasn't just asking about this moment. He was asking about something bigger, a reality he had faced for the first time today, judgment and discrimination that no one dared to admit existed. Michael hesitated, suspicion flickering in his eyes. They stood opposite each other, separated not by distance, but by something far deeper. "You're just sitting here, not doing anything," Michael replied, his voice firm but uncertain. "People don't want to be bothered by guys like you." John felt the sting in those words. It wasn't just about him. It was about everyone who had ever been looked down upon, dismissed, ignored. Michael had judged him based solely on his appearance. He had no idea that the man standing before him was John Thomas, one of the most influential figures in the tech industry. John couldn't stay silent any longer. "How do you know who I am?" His voice was steady, carrying the weight of something unexpected. Michael's eyes flickered, his stance shifting ever so slightly. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. John straightened, his posture strong and unwavering. "If I were wearing an expensive suit, if I were someone else, would you still treat me this way?" The question hung in the air, striking something raw within Michael. It stopped him cold, because suddenly the reality of the situation became clear. A crack had formed in his perspective, one that hadn't existed before. The silence stretched between them, thick and undeniable. Around them, people began to notice. Eyes turned. The world watched. John wasn't just standing up for himself. He was standing up for everyone who had ever been treated as less because of how they looked. For the first time in his life, Michael felt the weight of the prejudice he had unknowingly carried. John Thomas didn't flinch. His eyes bore into Michael's, a gaze not filled with anger, but with an unyielding truth, a truth that couldn't be ignored. Michael tried to hold his composure, but something was shifting. This wasn't just a simple confrontation anymore. This was something bigger. "Why do you think I don't belong here?" John asked, his words cutting through the tension like a blade. "Why am I being treated like this?" Michael hesitated. He had never questioned it before, never thought twice about telling someone to move along. But now he was questioning everything. John wasn't just asking for himself. He was challenging the entire system of assumptions and judgment. Michael felt a strange unease, as if the foundation of his beliefs was beginning to crumble. He had spent years seeing people one way, but had he ever really seen them? "Have you ever thought about people like me?" John pressed on, his voice unwavering. "Have you ever asked why I'm sitting here? Or did you just look at my clothes and decide I wasn't worth your respect?" Michael's throat tightened. A wave of realization crashed over him. Looking into John's eyes, he didn't see anger. He saw determination and hope. Hope that change was possible. Something inside Michael shifted. John's words weren't just making him rethink this moment. They were making him rethink everything. A subtle but powerful twist. And suddenly, Michael stood at a crossroads, one he could no longer ignore. John slowly pulled his phone from the pocket of his worn hoodie, the screen glowing in the dim light of the park. Michael stood motionless, his hands stiff at his sides, as if bracing for what was about to happen. The silence between them was thick, filled only by the sound of distant breaths from onlookers, but every pair of eyes was now locked onto John. With a few taps, John turned the screen toward Michael. A news article flashed across the display. The bold headline read, "John Thomas, billionaire, philanthropist, the man who changed his community." Michael's gaze faltered as he read the words. His mind raced, his assumptions shattered. The man standing before him was not a homeless stranger. He was not someone to be dismissed. He was a man who had donated hundreds of thousands of dollars to social initiatives, a man who had spent his life building opportunities for the very people society overlooked. John wasn't just sitting on a park bench. He had spent his life fighting for the people who had nowhere else to go. Michael's breath hitched, his heart clenched. This wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was a wake-up call. He had made a mistake, a huge one. The arrogance he had carried just moments ago vanished. He had judged this man by his appearance alone, without a second thought. And now that mistake was undeniable. A wave of unease swelled in Michael's chest. It was like being punched with the truth. His eyes flicked back to the phone, desperate to find a way to justify what had just happened. But there was nothing, no excuse, no explanation that could erase the reality of his actions. The park was silent. The people around them were no longer just watching. They were realizing. Michael wasn't the only one who had misjudged John. They all had. They had seen a man in ragged clothes and assumed he was worth less. But now, confronted with the truth, they felt the weight of their mistake. John stood there, saying nothing. He didn't need to. His silence carried more power than words ever could. There was no anger in his expression, no resentment, just a quiet, unshakable truth. They had all failed the test. John hadn't conducted this social experiment to prove a point. He had done it to make them face themselves, to expose the hidden bias they never wanted to admit. And now that bias was laid bare. Michael swallowed hard, guilt pressing against his ribs. This wasn't just about John. This was about all the people he had ever dismissed, all the faces he had looked past, all the judgments he had made without ever knowing the truth. And now, standing in front of John, he realized something. He had a choice. He could walk away, pretending this never happened, or he could change. John didn't have to say it. Michael already knew. The world wasn't going to change unless people did, unless he did. And for the first time, standing in the dim glow of the park, he felt something unfamiliar, the desire to be better. John's experiment wasn't over, but one thing was clear. Change had begun, and nothing could stop it now. The lesson of this story. This story delivers a powerful lesson on judgment, perception, and bias. In society, we are quick to judge people based on their appearance without ever stopping to consider who they really are. But the truth is, every person has a story, and their worth is not defined by what they wear, what they own, or what the world assumes about them. John Thomas' social experiment exposed an uncomfortable reality, one we all need to confront. How often do we judge others without truly seeing them? How often do we let assumptions dictate our actions? This story isn't just about Michael's mistake. It's about all of us, because change begins with awareness. And if we start seeing people for who they are rather than how they appear, we create a world where everyone is treated with the respect they deserve. Thank you for watching. If you found this video interesting or enjoyable, please show your support by giving it a thumbs up. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss out on our future uploads. Your support means the world to us and keeps us motivated to create even better content for you.